Hello everyone and welcome to my classroom. I'm Professor Leo and today I'll be teaching about keybinds, player movement and singletons in Godot C#. A small note before we begin, all my code will be written in C# since it's my language of choice, but I'll try to leave some resources for those wanting to implement in GDScript, and we'll also leave links to some C# beginner videos so you can get accustomed to the language. Our first step will be to implement our keybinds so that we know what we have to grab on the key manager or input manager, whatever you want to call it, in our code. So first off, let's go to project settings, input map, and then here we have a few, we should have a few built-in actions. It's normally not visible by default, so you have to toggle this in order to see those keybinds that Godot manages by default. You can modify these as you wish, but I normally don't modify them. So first off, let's add a few actions then. So implement up, for example. There it is. And now I can just click on this add event and map it to a key. It's already listening for input, so I can just press the up arrow and there it is. I can also add the WE, so this. All right. Okay, now those should be enough for now. We have the buttons for movement and we have those for firing our weapon. Next up, we will build the input handling class, which will be an Autoload Singleton, which I'll proceed to explain. Okay, so to explain an Autoload Singleton, I'm going to use this neat chalkboard I made, which basically I can just draw little figures on to explain. So imagine we have an Autoload part here. It's shown. Okay, I'm going to separate like this. And we have our scene 1 and our scene 2. Okay, now going by this, in the Autoload, I can basically have any class I desire as a global object that will be persistent throughout all my scenes. So for example, if I had an input manager, it would be created on this one, and when I pass through this, it would create in the new scene. And in the new scene, for example, if I had a player object demonstrated by this square, this circle, and I, for example, wanted to handle the move. So if I wanted to handle the move up event, I could just send a hook request to the move up action in the input manager. So these two would be connected, and every time this one gets called, it goes directly to this one, which will then move the player up. Basically, that's it. So let's get onto the code now so I can properly demonstrate. First off, let's create our generic class. This will be used to implement our instance object throughout all our classes that we want to basically create as an Autoload instance instead of just a simple class. So for starters, I'm going to create new script, and let me see. So for example, instance object. Normally in Unity I use instance behavior, so it basically matches what Unity uses by default, which is the mono behavior. So I basically put it accurately in that way. In the case of Godot, it could be instance object or it could be instance node, which could also work. So for that, I'm going to now go into here and say that I want to accept T here. The T needs to be in uppercase, and then in here where T is a node, like this. This will basically tell that whatever argument I pass here will be of a type node and will be my main class, which I want to basically create an instance of. So now we need to implement the following. Public static key instance should be null at start, because when we create the object, it will be starting as a null and we have to assign it on the first boot. So let me just override the ready function. Okay, like that. And on the top, let me say if instance equal null, I want the instance to be equal the current script as key. This will basically assign the current script I'm on to the generic class that I assigned above, which will be the instance, and assign it as the type I defined in passing here. I'll also demonstrate that. So I go into here, for example, I can already work on the input manager. Okay, create it, clicked on the wrong one. Okay, now if I go into here and say instance node of input manager, now if I, for example, just said input manager dot instance, there it is. It already creates the instance variable and basically saves us a bit of work in the future. So now what I want to do is first I want to declare my actions. Actions are basically what you're going to call every time you basically match a certain behavior you're looking for. For example, if I press up, I will then map it to the action move up in that I'll create. In the actions, you can basically transfer everything you want. For example, you can pass the if it's being pressed, if it's not being pressed, if you want to pass the vector of the basically movement up or up, down, and sides, for example. You can pass anything you want as long as you define it in the action. For example, public action vector 3 movement. Okay. I can just call it on movement. And basically, whenever I call this, it will also say, okay, I'm passing a vector 3, and everything that needs to hook to this action needs to also have a vector 3 as a parameter. Basically, that's it. Here we have already a build script that I worked on while I paused the recording. Basically, what I'm doing is I'm checking if the action movement up has been just pressed, meaning only on the frame I pressed it. In the process void, which basically runs every frame. And basically I'm checking it for every input I defined previously, which basically so far is only the movement part. And I'm defining the axis in our movement variable in regard to the button that's been pressed. For example, if the up has been pressed, the z-axis will go forward 1. If the down has been pressed, it will go backwards once. And same from right and left. Right 1 to the side, to our right in this case, which would be the x-axis, and the left -1 on the x-axis. This hasn't been tested, but normally this is how it works in most engines. It's the x for side movement and z for the forwards and backwards. And basically, if we have a difference, meaning if any of these inputs has been pressed and it's not a vector 0, we are going to try to invoke the action I mentioned previously, the on movement, and pass the movement to it. Basically, I also commented it out, so basically we all know what's going on here. The try is in case, for example, if you have the action hooked to a method, but you already deleted the script the method belongs to, it will try to invoke, fail, and throw an exception saying, well, the script has been deleted, I can't do anything. So now we can just move on to creating our player and seeing if we can move without any issues. So now that we have our input manager created, let's go back to our engine and set our input manager as an autoload. So go into project settings, on the Autoloads tab, set path or add create script, and then go into runtime input manager. Now let's add, and there it is. It will now start as soon as you start the game. Now that we have our autoload set, let's create the 3D scene where we will place the player. So we go into here, 3D scene. Okay, with our 3D scene created, we notice that at our top there is a node 3D. And now we can just go into add child, create a new mesh instance 3D, which will be our floor level. In the mesh, we are going to create a new plane mesh, which will basically be this square that we see. And then in the transform, we can just scale it to 10. And then we can see there's a bigger floor in our plane. And now that we have our plane created, we can just rename this as floor. There it is. And we can create another child, which will be character body 3D. Let me just raise it a bit so we can then see when we create a new mesh. So we are going to create a new mesh 3D. There it is, and it will be a capsule mesh, which is normally what's used as the default when you're trying to create a game. You normally start as a capsule and then you progress to an actual model. And now with that done, we can just place our player where we want. For example, here, it's just a bit above ground. Okay, now that our player is placed, we will need to basically add the collider to our player. So for that, we can click on this mesh button up here and then create a single convex collision sibling. This will basically generate a simple enough collision for our player. As you can see, there it is. One thing I also forgot was the collision for our basically our floor, since it doesn't have. And we can just create a tri-mesh static body, which basically says this will never move. It will stay always at the 0, 0 position. Okay, now that we have the collision shape for both of them, we can just go on to creating our character movement. For that, Godot actually has a neat feature, which is as soon as you create a script, it will auto-generate the movement part of your player. As you can see, as soon as I create a new script, I'm going to place it in my runtime folder, just say it's the player script. Okay, player.cs. There it is. You can see the speed, jump velocity. It also handles the gravity, the vectors, for example, direction calculation, etc. Basically everything you want, it's already here, which is pretty awesome. So what I want to do now is basically add my hooks and basically convert this. Okay, I can't convert this because it's a character body 3D, so this can be an instance node as we created. So the only thing we can do is basically say we are going to override ready. Let's just check if our input manager is created. So if instance is not null, sometimes you might not remember to add to the autoload, and so it will throw an error. This way you will always know. And also just go into else and say gd.print input manager not created. Okay, just as a small check. And then you can say input manager.instance.onMovement plus equal, which basically says we are going to hook into this action into our onMovement method that we will create by just saying create method onMovement. It will accept a vector3, which will be our input here. And we can just move all of this out of here. Okay. The only thing that's missing is the delta. Okay, the only thing we can add back here is basically this velocity. We can just say this. I don't need this anymore. In here I can accept. Basically in here I can just pass my input there. And now it should work really well as we basically commanded it. Okay. We can basically just test now. So if I go into here and play, select our current scene, save it as, for example, test in a folder called scenes, just so we can keep it all organized. Okay, it will now build our .NET project and basically run our game. Oh, I forgot one step. We need to add our camera. So to add our camera, first let's create a node 3D, which will be our camera's anchor point. Camera anchor. There it is. And from there, let's add a camera 3D. There we go. Now, if for example, if we want to see the camera as a preview, you can just click on here that says toggle camera preview. You can basically see what the camera is seeing. Let's just adjust a bit, for example, like this, and see. For example, we can now see a bit of our plane. Now, if we try to play, what will happen? Let's test. As you can see, it's basically all dark. The next step basically is to create our environment. On the top here, you can see three buttons, three dots that basically if you click here, you can see preview sun and preview environment. This is basically your skybox if you're familiar with Unity. So we need to add both. Add sun and add environment. There it is. And you just call this the sun. Okay. Okay, now let's just position our camera a bit better so we can see what we need to see. In here, let me just change the position back to this, and I'll position the anchor a bit, let me see, a bit here. Okay, now let's try to find our player. I turn this off and just adjust this rotation, if I'm not mistaken. Now, when I try to go here, okay, now that I have my camera anchor a bit more positioned, I can just press on play. And now you can see that the player is moving. If we press the keys, it's just that it's not moving properly. This is because I messed up, and instead of putting his action here, I should have just set his action pressed instead of just pressed. Basically says that this will be called always with movement.x as if it's moving. Now it should work properly. Okay, as you can see, it's moving as we want. Sometimes you might need to adjust your camera properly to better reflect your axis. For example, in my case, my up, down, left, right is basically switched because my camera is not placed correctly. So you basically need to tinker around a bit and see what matches. You can most likely even edit as inside your character body and have it move at the same time as your character. Basically to follow a bit more your character. But yeah, basically that's it. I hope you enjoyed. Do try to tinker around a bit and see the marvelous creations you can do with just this knowledge. And if you liked, please leave a like, subscribe, and leave a comment down below with your opinion and any features you'd like to see approached in the future. And basically that's it. I hope you enjoyed and have a nice day. That's all for today. Leo signing out.